For 2 hours, the men in the boardroom dismissed the old man in the worn brown suit. 41 floors above the street in Columbus, Ohio, in a room with a table that cost more than a house, the board of Corriveau Industries was about to vote to shut down the plant that had built the company and put an entire town out of work. And the old man who had driven up that morning in a 15-year-old pickup truck sat at the far end of the table, saying nothing, while men in suits that fit him better than his own skin decided the fate of a place not one of them had ever seen. They assumed he was a small shareholder. Confused, maybe someone's uncle. When he first sat down, the CEO's assistant had quietly asked if he was in the right room. He was in the right room. And when the chairman finally moved to call the vote, and someone told the old man politely that public comment was closed, he stood up. Slowly, the way a 79-year-old man stands. He buttoned the jacket of the brown suit. And he said one sentence, in a voice that had spent 45 years on a factory floor and knew how to be heard over machinery. And the room that had spent 2 hours pretending he wasn't there went so silent you could hear the air moving through the vents. What that one sentence was, and why a retired machinist had the power to stop the most important vote in the company's history, is a story about the quietest people in every room, and what happens on the day they finally decide to speak. There is a town in Ohio called Marin, and on a Thursday in March, a room full of strangers 4 hours away tried to erase it. This is the story of the man who wouldn't let them. Marin, Ohio, has a population of 9,200 people, a water tower, 2 churches, a diner, and a factory. It has always had the factory. The factory is the reason there is a town at all. Corriveau Industries was founded in Marin in 1959 by a French-Canadian toolmaker named Henri Corriveau, Hunk, to everyone who knew him, who started with a rented garage, a single lathe, and a conviction that you could build a great company without treating the people who built it like parts. For 50 years, Corriveau made precision components, the small, unglamorous metal pieces that go inside the machines that make everything else. You have never heard of Corriveau. But there is Corriveau steel in the landing gear of airplanes you have flown on, and in the presses that stamped the body of your car, and in the machines that filled the bottle of medicine in your cabinet. The Marin plant employed 1,100 people. In a town of 9,000, that is not a factory. That is the ground everyone is standing on. It is the mortgage on Fuller Street, and the tuition at the community college, and the tab at the diner, and the offering plate at both churches. When people in Marin said the plant, they said it the way people in other places say the family. Hank Corriveau understood that. He built it into the company. There is a line cast into the bronze plaque still bolted to the wall of the original building, the words Hank wrote himself in 1959. "We do not make parts. We make Marin." Hank died in 2009, and in the years after, the thing that happens to companies happened to Corriveau. It went public. The family sold down its shares. The stock scattered into the hands of institutions and funds and men 4 hours away who had never smelled cutting oil, and slowly, quarter by quarter, the company stopped being a town with a factory in it and started being a line item on somebody's spreadsheet. Which is how, 16 years after Hank Corriveau died, his board came to be sitting in a tower in Columbus, preparing to vote on a proposal titled Project Meridian, the closure of the Marin plant, the relocation of production overseas, the elimination of 1,100 jobs, and a projected 18% increase in the share price by the following spring. The man who built Project Meridian, and who believed in it with his whole heart, was the CEO. His name was Cole Brandt. And to understand this story, you have to understand that Cole Brandt was not a villain. He was something more complicated, and more human, and much harder to hate. Cole Brandt was 43 years old, and he was, by every measure, brilliant. He had been brought in by the board 2 years earlier to do exactly the thing he was now doing: to look at a sentimental old company and make the hard, unsentimental decisions that would save it. He wore his competence like armor. He spoke in clean, precise sentences. He had never once, in 2 years, raised his voice, because men like Cole Brandt do not need to. And he believed, sincerely, all the way down, that closing the Marin plant was the moral thing to do. To understand why, you have to go back to a lumber yard in a different small town 30 years earlier, and a man named Gene Brandt. Gene Brandt was Cole's father, and he had owned a lumber and hardware business, a good one, the kind of place where he knew every customer's name and carried half the town on credit through bad winters. And Gene Brandt loved his people. That was the whole problem, in the end. When the big box store opened on the highway in the 90s and the numbers started to bleed, Gene refused to cut. He wouldn't lay anyone off. These were his people. He kept 40 employees on a payroll that could carry 25, month after month, telling himself that loyalty would be repaid, that things would turn, that a man does not abandon the people who built his business. Things did not turn. Gene Brandt held on out of love and sentiment until there was nothing left to hold. And then the whole thing collapsed at once, and all 40 of them lost their jobs anyway, on the same day, with no severance, because there was nothing left. Gene lost the business, the house, and eventually, slowly, himself. He died 6 years later, and Cole, who was in business school by then, sat at the funeral and drew the lesson that would organize the rest of his life. Sentiment is a lie that kills. My father loved those people to death. The only real kindness is the hard math. Done early, done clean, before there's nothing left to save. Cole Brandt was not trying to destroy Marin. In his own mind, he was trying to save Corriveau from becoming his father, to make the hard cut now, while the company was still strong enough to survive it, rather than clinging to a plant out of nostalgia until the whole enterprise went down and took everyone with it. He genuinely believed he was the only adult in the room, the only one willing to do the unpopular, responsible, necessary thing. That is what made him so hard to argue with. And it is why the argument that finally beat him could not be about feelings. It had to be about something Cole Brandt could not dismiss. The old man in the brown suit was about to give it to him. His name was Ray Tolliver. Ray was 79 years old, and he had started on the floor of the Marin plant in 1966, at 19, on a manual lathe, for $1.90 an hour. He had worked there for 45 years, through 3 recessions, 2 strikes, the day they buried Hank Corriveau, and the slow strange years after, when the company started belonging to people he'd never meet. He had retired in 2011. He still lived in the same house on Fuller Street he'd bought in 1971, 4 blocks from the plant gate, and most mornings he still drove past it out of habit, just to see the lights on. Ray was not a wealthy man. He had a machinist's pension and a paid-off house, and a truck with 200,000 miles on it. And if you had passed him at the Marin Diner, you would have seen exactly what the board saw: an old man in a brown suit, not worth a second look. But here is the thing about Ray Tolliver that the men in the tower did not know. In 1966, when Corriveau was tiny and broke, and Hank couldn't always make payroll in cash, he had done something that companies used to do and mostly don't anymore. He had paid his earliest, most loyal workers partly in stock, real ownership in a company that was, at the time, worth almost nothing. Most of the men took the shares and sold them the first chance they got, because a man raising kids needs cash, not paper. Ray kept his. He never had a good reason to. He just never sold. Through 60 years and 11 stock splits and the whole improbable growth of the thing, Ray Tolliver held on to a small piece of the company he built with his hands. And when Hank Corriveau died, he had left something in his will, a quiet bequest of additional shares, divided among the men and women who were here at the beginning, who never sold, who stayed. There were not many of them left by then. Ray was one. It still would not have been enough. Ray's own stake by 2025 was a little under 6%, meaningful but not decisive. But 4 months before that vote, when word had leaked out of Columbus about Project Meridian, Ray Tolliver had done something. He had gotten in the truck, and over 16 weeks, he had driven 6,000 miles across Ohio and into 3 neighboring states, to the homes of every surviving Corriveau retiree and every widow of one, all the old-timers who, like him, had taken Hank's stock in the early years and, unlike most, had held it. 340 of them. He sat at their kitchen tables. He drank their coffee. He told them what was coming for Marin. And he asked them for their proxies, the right to vote their shares. Every single one of them said yes. So when Ray Tolliver walked into that boardroom in Columbus in his brown suit and sat quietly at the end of the table for 2 hours and let a room full of strangers decide the fate of his town, he was not a confused small shareholder who had wandered into the wrong room. He was carrying the signed votes of 340 people who had built the company with their hands. And together, they controlled 29% of Corriveau Industries, more than every person at that table combined. He was just waiting. He wanted to hear what they'd say first. He wanted to know exactly who he was dealing with. The meeting was everything Ray had expected, and worse. For 2 hours, he listened to men who had never set foot in Marin describe it as a problem to be solved. He listened to Cole Brandt present Project Meridian with the calm precision of a surgeon describing an amputation, the cost savings, the margin improvement, the unfortunate but necessary workforce reduction. 1,100 human beings compressed into a line on a slide. He listened to a young analyst walk the board through a model that proved, in clean columns, that Marin was worth more dead than alive. He listened, and he said nothing, and he watched. He watched the analyst, especially a young woman, maybe 29, named Priya Anand, who had built the closure model and who could not. Ray noticed. Quite look at the screen while she presented it. She said the words, workforce reduction, footprint optimization, but her voice went flat and careful on them. The voice of a person saying something they have decided not to feel. Ray had grown up around people who did hard things they didn't believe in. He knew the sound. Twice, someone at the table glanced at the old man in the corner and looked away. Once the chairman, a man named Gerald Voss, asked him, not unkindly, but the way you'd address a lost tourist, whether he had a question, and Ray just shook his head. Not yet. At the 2-hour mark, Cole Brandt finished. The slide went dark, and Gerald Voss said, "All right. I think we've had a thorough discussion. If there's nothing further, I'd like to move to a vote on Project Meridian." That was when a young associate near Ray leaned over and murmured, "Kindly, sir, I'm sorry. The public portion is closed now. If you'd like to wait outside, we can." And Ray Tolliver stood up. He buttoned the jacket of the brown suit. He put his weathered hands flat on the expensive table, and he said the one sentence that everyone in that room would remember for the rest of their lives. "Before you vote, gentlemen, you should know that I'm carrying the signed proxies of 340 people who built this company with their hands, and together, we own more of it than everyone at this table combined." Nobody moved. Cole Brandt looked at him for the first time all day. Really looked, and something in his face changed as the words landed, and kept landing. Gerald Voss opened a folder, scanned a page, and went pale. And Priya Anand, the young analyst, put down her pen and stared at the old man in the brown suit like a person seeing a door open in a wall she thought was solid. "My name is Ray Tolliver," he said into the silence. "I ran a lathe in the Marin plant for 45 years. I was there when Hank Corriveau couldn't make payroll and paid us in stock instead, and I'm the fool who never sold it." He let that sit. "You've spent 2 hours in this room deciding to kill a town, and I couldn't help noticing that not one of you has ever been there. So before anybody votes on Marin, I think Marin ought to get a seat at the table. I'm it." Cole Brandt did not fold. That is the part that matters. A lesser man would have collapsed, but Cole Brandt believed he was right, and men who believe they are right do not fold. They fight. "Mr. Tolliver," he said, and his voice was steady and almost gentle. "I understand. I do. But respectfully, sentiment doesn't change the numbers. That plant loses money every quarter it stays open. If we don't do this now, while the company is strong, we will be doing something far worse in 5 years, when it's weak. And then it won't be 1,100 jobs. It'll be all of them. I'm not trying to hurt Marin. I'm trying to keep this company alive, so there's anything left to save. Somebody in this room has to be willing to do the hard thing." And Ray Tolliver looked at him. And he did the thing the framework of every wise man is built on. He did not attack. He acknowledged. "You're not wrong about the numbers, son," Ray said quietly. "I've read them. That plant does lose money the way you're running it. And I'll tell you something else. You're braver than most of the men in this room, because you're the only one willing to say a hard thing out loud instead of hiding behind him." He nodded at the chairman. "I respect that. I mean it." Then he leaned forward. "But I want to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it honestly, because I think you're an honest man underneath all this." He paused. "Whose lumberyard are you really trying to save?" The room did not understand the question. But Cole Brandt did. His face went white. Because there was no possible way this old man in a brown suit from a town in Ohio could know about Gene Brandt, and the lumberyard, and the 40 people, and the funeral, except that Ray Tolliver, before he drove to Columbus, had done what Ray Tolliver always did. He had done his homework. He had learned who Cole Brandt was. He had learned where the wound was. "I know about your father," Ray said, gently now, so gently. "I know what he did, and I know what it cost him, and I know what you decided it meant. And I'm sorry, son. That's a hard thing for a boy to carry." He straightened. "But you learned the wrong lesson from it. Your daddy didn't die because he cared about his people. He died because he cared about them and didn't have a plan. Love without a plan is how you lose everything. You're right about that. But a plan without love is just a faster way to the same funeral. And I did not drive 6,000 miles to watch you kill my town to prove something to a dead man who'd be ashamed of what you're about to do in his name." He looked around the table. "I'm not here to close the meeting. I'm here to open it. Because I've got a plan. And unlike Project Meridian, mine keeps the plant, keeps the town, keeps the company, and Mr. Brandt, it keeps you. But it's going to be harder than closing a door and flying the work overseas. It's going to take patience and belief, and about 3 years of doing the unglamorous thing instead of the easy one." He almost smiled. "I ran a lathe for 45 years. I know a little about doing the unglamorous thing for a long time. The question is whether anybody in this room does." They did not vote on Project Meridian that day. Ray asked for the room, and Cole Brandt, to his enormous credit, and this is the beginning of who Cole Brandt turned out to be, gave it to him. The two of them sat alone in that boardroom for 3 hours after everyone else had gone. an old machinist and a young CEO. And Ray Tolliver laid out the plan he had been building for 4 months in the cab of his truck. It was not sentimental. That was the thing that got through to Cole. It was hard and specific and real. A retooling of the Marin plant toward the high-precision, low-volume work that couldn't be done cheaply overseas, the kind of work Corriveau had been walking away from because it was difficult. It meant investment before return. It meant 3 lean years. It meant Cole Brandt standing in front of the board and Wall Street and saying, "Wait," which is the hardest word in business. And in the middle of it, Cole Brandt, the man who never raised his voice, who wore his competence like armor, put his head in his hands and said, quietly, "I've spent my whole career terrified of becoming my father." And Ray Tolliver, 79 years old, reached across that expensive table and put his rough hand on the younger man's shoulder and said, "Son, your father was a good man who made one mistake. You could do a lot worse than becoming him. You just have to become the version of him who had a plan. I'll help you. That's what I came here to do." Cole Brandt looked up at him. And something that had been clenched shut in that man for 30 years came loose. Here is what happened after. The vote on Project Meridian never took place. Cole Brandt withdrew it himself at the next board meeting and presented in its place a 3-year plan to save the Marin plant, a plan built by a retired machinist and a reformed CEO sitting side by side. The board resisted. Wall Street punished the stock. For 18 months it was ugly, and there were quarters where it looked like Cole had bet the company on an old man's stubbornness and lost. Then it started to work. By the end of the 2nd year, the retooled Marin plant was doing precision work no overseas competitor could touch, at margins the old high-volume business had never seen. By the 3rd year, Corriveau Industries was more profitable than it had ever been under Project Meridian's projections, and it still had its town. The stock, which had been punished, recovered, and then passed where the closure would have taken it. Because it turned out that a company known for keeping its promises could command a loyalty that a company known for breaking them could not. Marin, Ohio, still has 1,100 jobs. The diner is still full at lunch. Both churches still pass the plate. The bronze plaque still hangs on the wall of the original building. We do not make parts. We make Marin, and Cole Brandt had it cleaned and relit, and he stands in front of it now when he gives tours. And he tells the story of the day an old man in a brown suit taught him the difference between love without a plan and a plan without love. Priya Anand, the young analyst who had built the closure model and couldn't look at the screen, resigned from the deal team the week after the meeting and asked Cole for a different job. She had grown up in a factory town in Michigan that lost its factory, and she had spent 2 years building models that did to other towns what had been done to hers, and she had gone quiet inside about it. Cole gave her the turnaround. She ran the numbers on saving Marin instead of killing it, and she was brilliant at it, and she is a vice president now, and she says the day Ray Tolliver stood up in that room was the day she remembered why she'd wanted to be good at this in the first place. She drives to Marin once a month. She knows the plant floor by name. Ray Tolliver went home to Fuller Street. He did not take a board seat, though they offered him one. He did not cash out his shares, though they were worth more than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. He kept driving the truck. When people asked him why he'd done it, 6,000 miles, 340 kitchen tables, at 79 years old, he'd shrug and say, somebody had to give Marin a seat at the table. I was just the one who still had the paperwork. He and Cole Brandt talk on the phone every Sunday. The younger man calls the older one for advice he doesn't always take, and Ray gives it the way he gives everything, plainly, without heat. Cole has said, in more than one interview, that Ray Tolliver is the closest thing to a father he's had since he was 30. Ray just says the boy turned out fine. He always says the boy. About a man in his 40s who runs a company worth billions. That's the part I keep coming back to. I've told this story a number of times, and the moment everyone wants to talk about is the one sentence, the old man standing up, the reveal, the numbers, the beautiful silence when the room full of people who dismissed him realized who he was. And I understand it. It's the moment we all wait for. It's the moment the quiet person we've all been, in some room, at some time, finally gets to stand up and be counted. But that's not the part that stays with me. The part that stays with me is what Ray did after he won. Because think about the position he was in. He walked into that room holding the power to destroy Cole Brandt. He had the votes. He had the wound. He knew about the father, the lumberyard, the funeral, the whole broken thing. He could have used it as a weapon. He could have humiliated the man who tried to kill his town in front of the whole board, and no one would have blamed him. That's what we expect. That's what the story is supposed to be. The arrogant executive gets what's coming to him. And Ray Tolliver, holding all that power, chose to save the man instead. He'd already beaten Cole. The vote was over the second he stood up. He didn't need to redeem him. Saving Marin didn't require saving Cole Brandt too. It would have been easier, cleaner, more satisfying to simply crush him and move on. But Ray looked at the man who tried to destroy everything he loved, and instead of the wound, he saw the boy at the funeral. And instead of the enemy, he saw somebody worth saving. And he did the harder thing. I think winning is common. I think most of us, given the votes, would win. What's rare, what almost nobody does, is what you do to the person on the other side once you no longer have to do anything at all. The mercy you extend when you've already won and could just as easily twist the knife. That's the whole measure of a person, right there, in the 10 minutes after the victory, when nobody would fault you for being cruel. So here's what I'll leave you with. Somewhere in your life, there's probably a person who wronged you, or tried to. And somewhere down the road, you may find yourself holding the power to make them pay for it. And on that day, you'll get to choose what kind of person you are, not by whether you win, but by what you do once you have. I hope when it's my turn, I've got a little of Ray Tolliver in me. I'm not sure I will. But it's the thing worth trying to become. This story is a work of fiction. Ray Tolliver, Cole Brandt, Hank Corriveau, Priya Anand, Corriveau Industries, the town of Marin, and every place and event in it were created for this narration. Any resemblance to real people, companies, or towns is coincidental. If someone once stood up for you when you couldn't stand up for yourself, a quiet person nobody expected to speak, who spoke anyway, tell me about them in the comments. Say their name. Those are the people this whole channel is really about. If this story reached you, send it to one person tonight who's holding something heavy and quiet. And let them know the quiet ones are the ones who end up mattering most. And if you want more stories told this way, slowly, and with respect for everyone in them, even the ones who were wrong, subscribe, and I'll have the next one ready for you. Take care of each other. I'll see you in the next one.